And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio. This is episode number 35 of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 327th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, July 13th, 2017. I am Jared Morris, your host for Assembly Call Radio, where each week we break down the most important IU basketball stories from the past 7 days. Remember, once the season starts, you can catch us immediately after every IU basketball game on the Assembly Call IU postgame show. Watch us live at assemblycall.com. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just go to assemblycall.com/YouTube. And if you can't catch one of our shows live, you can always catch up with our podcast. Just search for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts, and you will find us. All right, well, let's begin how we always begin, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And finally, this week, a few options to choose from. You had Peaks.com reporting Thursday that the number 3 ranked player in the class of 2019, James Weissman, lists Indiana among the schools that he wants to visit, along with Kentucky, Duke, and Kansas. That's always a good thing. There have been several strong performances by IU alums in the NBA Summer League, which we'll get to in a bit. And Colin Hartman was cleared for contact, which was great to hear. But I'm going with something a little more subtle for this week's Hoosier Proud banner moment, something that may well be the single biggest difference between last year's disaster of a season and what I continue to think will be a 2017-18 season that is going to surprise on the positive side. So at Tuesday's media availability, Juwan Morgan was asked this question. I know it's early, but what is the biggest difference you've seen from this team from a year ago that the fans are going to notice right when they see you guys practicing and playing? Juwan's simple, succinct response, quote, I feel like there won't be any questions of leadership at all. In answers to other questions, Juwan made it clear that he is taking it upon himself to be more of a leader, both vocally and by example. And he discussed what the team missed last year not having Colin Hartman that they will presumably have this year with him back. And I have a few sources close to the program who have been effusive in their praise of Robert Johnson's emergence as a leader as well. So add it all up, and it's extremely positive in terms of what we're hearing from a leadership standpoint so far for Indiana. Now, right now, it's all just talk. The proof will be in the play. But during the summer months, all we really have to go on is what is said. And at the moment, it sounds like one of Indiana's biggest deficiencies from last season could end up being a strength in this one coming up. And that was this week's banner moment, brought to you by our friends at HoosierProud.com. Now, let me introduce my esteemed co-hosts for this evening. And we have our full roster tonight with Ryan and Andy both here. To my left, one of the world's most respected bracketologists, and as the president of the Robert Johnson Fan Club, he already has a spreadsheet ready to count down Rojo's quest to pass Greg Graham on the all-time IU scoring list. He is Andy Bottoms. Andy, what is your Bottoms line from the past week in Indiana basketball?
You know, I think this week is a good one to talk about just how crazy IU fans are for any little bit of news or anything going on. I know we had the same thing getting ready for the show, trying to figure out like what's going to happen, what are we going to talk about, and then the media availability comes like, all right, we've got something to talk about. Even though like one of the first ones I watched, there was really very little said, but it was still enough to get everybody excited about, seeing some of the guys and the the changes they've made. Physically and just hearing them talk about the change in coaching and what they're looking forward to over the course of the season. And, I think that says a lot about the fan base. Recruiting obviously is pretty big this time as they're getting into the live period in July, and that will certainly be a focus. But for me, as someone who doesn't get too far into that, was exciting to, just hear some of the guys' thoughts on the upcoming season. And I think it's, certainly an easy thing to do as an IU fan and just anybody in the middle of July to get excited about seeing these guys. And then you kind of come to the harsh reality that the season isn't as close as you wish that it was. But it was a little bit of a, oasis in the middle of the desert that is the off season to, kind of look forward to and get some thoughts from both Archie and a number of the players. And, it sounds like the schedule's pretty close to being done, at least from the non-conference standpoint. So, sounds pretty close to being able to get that to look at in a little bit more depth, and have another good question about that coming up in the Twitter Q&A about, the Big Ten, some of the nuances there. So, an exciting week, even though when you probably look back in retrospect in a few weeks, it's like, yeah, I don't know what we really learned. I don't really know what was said, but I guess that's, symptomatic of the of how we're just dying to get any little bit of news.
And to my right, we have the guy who was almost kicked out of a recent Toronto Raptors Summer League game for heckling Will Sheehy with, quote, constructive criticism, a columnist for thebiglead.com, and a man who is proudly broadcasting his first episode with his brand new Big Baller brand microphone. It's made of paper clips and gum and only costs $700. He is Ryan Phillips. Ryan, what would you like to rant about this week?
Well, I'd like to talk up this microphone because I might get some cash out of it. But, I think that the biggest story for me, actually, I mean, the media availability was big, and we'll get into that. But the biggest story for me is how well some former Indiana guys are performing in the Summer League. I think it's been really impressive. And I know we're going to talk about that right after this. So I figured I'd make that my rant. It's really nice to see these guys having improved over the last few months, have a good showing in Summer League, reflects well on the program, reflects well on Indiana and the preparation they're getting there. And I can't remember a year where this many IU guys were having success in the Summer League. I mean, obviously the Summer League is a very different animal now than it was in the past. It's, all the games are broadcast virtually, and some of them, the ones that aren't broadcast, are on ESPN3 and you can watch them. They actually keep the stats. You can go check them out, all that stuff. And there's highlights everywhere. So you're seeing a lot of production from these guys who went to Indiana, and I think that you're hearing the announcers talk them up. So it's really good to see. We wish all those kids who go to the next level well when they leave Indiana. So it's great to see that some of them are carving out a niche. Some might wind up in the G League, some might wind up overseas, but you're seeing some performance, and I think that reflects well on the program and will long term.
It's a good reminder that 2016 team was pretty darn good, too.
It was pretty darn good.
Guys are really doing well in the Summer League. So we are, as Ryan mentioned, we are going to talk about that a little bit more here coming up at the end of this segment. We will also dive into this week's media availability and give you our top takeaways from that. And then we've got some great questions, including one about the schedule that I found really, really interesting in terms of what Big Ten games we want to see Indiana get in December. I think that'll be a fun discussion. All of that and more coming up on this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio. First, real quick, a word about this week's sponsor, SeatGeek. Buying tickets to sports and concerts can be complicated, as you know, but there is a better, simpler way to buy with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to live events. With SeatGeek's seamless mobile experience, you can buy and sell tickets in just 2 taps. SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. There is nothing quite like seeing your favorite team or musician in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone, and I plan on using it liberally next season to hopefully catch a lot of former Hoosiers. Obviously, you got Victor with the Pacers and Yogi with the Mavericks, and hopefully Troy stays on with the Rockets, and Thomas gets a chance with the Lakers, and on and on. So there should be a lot of opportunities this year to watch, or this upcoming season, to watch the Hoosiers in the NBA, and you should be using your SeatGeek app when you do that, because SeatGeek is designed to make your ticket buying experience easier than ever. And best of all, our listeners get $20 off of their first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code ASSEMBLY today. That's promo code ASSEMBLY, ASSEMBLY, for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. All righty, you are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips. And Ryan, you teased it a little bit there in your opening statement, the Summer League. But let's talk about some of the Hoosiers in particular who are playing well. And the guy who I think should lead off this discussion is Troy Williams, because, based on what I've seen on Twitter, I haven't seen any of the actual games, but stat lines, highlights, and just the superlatives that you see on Twitter, it looks like we've gotten a whole lot of good Troy so far this summer.
Yeah, he's been one of the best players in the Summer League. In the Las Vegas portion, he is the 4th leading scorer, averaging 24.3 points a game. I'm not going to go into all his numbers, but the rest are very nice. He fits very well with that up and down system they're running under Mike D'Antoni there, and that they have translated to Summer League. And he's not only that, he's looking like a leader. He's finishing at the rim. He's getting steals defensively. He's averaging 2.3 steals a game, something we didn't see a whole lot of from Troy in college. He looks like he's an adult playing with young kids, and it's only his 2nd year in. He looks like a 5th-year veteran playing in Summer League. You see some of these guys who are fringe players who have played a couple times in Summer League come in, and oftentimes they dominate and look really good. That's what Troy looks like but he's only a second-year guy. So I think he has done really well. He's made a lot of three-pointers. He shot very well from distance. We know that was a struggle for him when he was at Indiana. Clearly, he's gotten better at it. But his finishing ability has been off the charts, and he's really been a leader for that Houston team, which – I mean, that's great to see for Troy. I mean, he's essentially, I think he's played his way onto the roster. We'll see if he lasts all year, but I think he has easily played his way onto the roster. I mean, scoring 24.3 points a game in 28 minutes a game is pretty darn good. And well,
especially with the mass exodus of players that they had in the Chris Paul deal.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing is that, he's playing for a team that doesn't have a lot around him, and he's doing really well. And so I've been impressed with what I've seen from Troy. This isn't college Troy where it's up and down. He's been pretty consistent, and that's really good to see. And we know he had flashes as a rookie. He showed flashes with Memphis, and then again with Houston, showed some really good things, and that was great to see as well. So he's really carried that in and looked even better in Summer League.
I think I watched a little bit of him just to jump in, and I think one of the things we would always talk about with him at IU is like does he know what he's doing when he's playing well, and I think he seems to have gotten a really good grasp on that in the action that I've watched. His shot has improved. You can tell he's a little bit more confident there, but he's doing a really good job, like Ryan said, getting to the basket, shooting really well from the foul line. I know one of the first games he shot I think 10, maybe even more free throws than that in the in his first game out there. And I think he just seems more comfortable with what he's doing and has really, refined his game to really focus on what makes him most effective.
Well, yeah. I would say it's just he's matured. He has matured as a basketball player. And I think that we were waiting for that for a long time. There's so much potential. And it just seems like he's not out there going 1,000 miles an hour all the time. He knows how to pace himself and knows how to pick his spots.
Yogi is another interesting story. He obviously was a revelation for the Mavericks in the second half of last season and had his deal guaranteed for this upcoming season. But they, of course, drafted Dennis Smith, who everybody here in Dallas is really, really excited about. And so it's going to be interesting to see what role Yogi will have. We know he's solidly part of the Mavericks mix for this year. Will he be the backup point guard coming off the bench? That's what it looks like, because it looks like they're going to give the keys to Dennis Smith. But we all know Yogi, and we know that he is not going to go down or take a backseat to anybody without a fight. So that will be an interesting, kind of storyline to watch play out. But I think the other guy, that's really interesting from a will he make the roster standpoint and what can he be in the NBA is Thomas Bryant. Ryan, have we learned anything about Thomas's future in the NBA from the first few Summer League games?
I think that whoever he was working out with before he went to before he was drafted by the Lakers deserves a bonus, because he just looks so much more well-rounded. You don't see a lot of the, shuffling his feet and things like that when he's out on the perimeter. He looks like he's running to a spot, getting there, being solid, not drifting. His ball handling is better. I mean, as we've said many times with Thomas, you can't teach a 7'6" wingspan. You can't teach the way he runs the floor. You can't teach some of the things he can do. And he does have hidden athleticism that, will come out at times and get more consistent as he gets older. But I think that in the first game, he was outstanding for the Lakers. 13 points. He was one of the best players on the floor in the first half of his first game. And I think that they, and he stepped out and hit a three and his shot looks more smooth. I think the big key with the Lakers really like him. If you read the comments, they really, really like him. He's going to be with the organization. The question is whether or not he's down with the G League or he's coming up. And I think he'll start in the G League and maybe run most of the season down there and come up in spots if there's an injury or something. But they love his ability, but they also are aware that he's still only 19. And Rob Pelinka was discussing it, the Lakers GM, and he said one of the best things about Thomas was that there's so much untapped potential, and that if they want to improve his flexibility, want to improve his conditioning a little. They said he was really well conditioned when he came in, but they want to keep that up. So they said improve his flexibility and then just round off the edges of his game, ball handling, things like that, and just get him a little stronger. And they think he can be a guy for them. With Brook Lopez there right now at center, they have Ivica Zubac as the backup. So Thomas kind of doesn't have a spot. But Brook Lopez is only going to be there for 1 year and then he's gone. So there's a chance for him. There's room there in Los Angeles for him, and they really like him. So I think he'll get a chance.
It's good to hear. And obviously, James Blackman Jr., Will Sheehy also playing in the Summer League. Nothing really notable for them yet, but it's nice seeing so many Indiana guys in there and getting a chance. And so we hope as many of those guys as possible make it onto rosters for the upcoming season. All right, let's move on to segment number 2. We are going to break down this week's media availability and give you our top takeaways, because there was a lot, I think, that we learned from the players and the coaches, and we will get to that next on the Assembly Call. All right. Good first segment, guys. Hey, everybody watching live.
If you guys get a chance, go to the Big Lead and check out the highlights I posted from Lonzo Ball last night. Holy crap, was that fun. He had 36, 8 rebounds, 11 assists, 5 steals, and 3 blocks.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty good. It was like, finally, there he is.
There you go. Oh, yeah, we forgot to mention OG. Obviously, he's hurt, so not taking part in the Summer League. But giving typical OG answers to media questions, which is always entertaining.
What's funny is he's not going to make the Raptors, but he's one of the leaders on the team.
Is he?
He's one of the guys they go to
for points and stuff?
No, leaders like personality-wise.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, no, he's the first guy they send out for media stuff. And
Yogi's been just watching this game tonight. He's like struggled with his shot a little bit, but he's really made some good defensive plays. And
has he changed his shot? I saw a couple highlights and it looked like he was shooting differently.
I think he's shooting I think he's releasing it a little higher.
Yeah, ask the shot doctor. You can't. The funny thing is about them, like, in looking at their roster, like, they don't. I mean, he's playing with Smith. They're playing the two of them together a lot, and
they can play together
in Summer League. And given what appears to be very little wing and shooting guard depth on their roster as it stands today, you could see that potentially. Like, they have Wes Matthews and Harrison Barnes, and otherwise they don't really have anybody that plays either of those spots. That's
Smith would have to play the 2 because he's more athletic and a little bigger. But so they'd be in a huge size deficit. But
all right, so segment 2, let's talk media availability. So Andy, I'll go to you first, get your top takeaway, and then Ryan, I'll go to you because I already gave mine from Juwan Morgan.
Okay, I'll do just Duran. Everybody's raving about Duran.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, we'll hit Duran. I thought that was the biggest story.
So yeah.
All right, so Andy, find a non-Duran.
Yeah, great.
To lead us off with.
Curtis Jones was good, I thought. Talking about they're all working on getting stronger and more consistent with their jumpers and things like that,
and not turning the ball over.
And that was the big one. I was going to say that and aggressiveness on defense those were the main takeaways I had. Was that everybody talked about aggressiveness on defense.
Leadership, fewer turnovers, aggressiveness on defense. I'm not even going to recognize this program next year.
Yeah, basically the opposite of everything you
yeah. Okay, that'll be great to see. All right, let's do this.
Well, I tell you what, if you're going to do that, I mean, the next obvious one is really Duran. So go to Ryan first, and then I'll do something after that. But it doesn't really make sense.
Let's hit Duran to start.
Okay. It's something that clearly wasn't one of the focuses of like everybody asking multiple questions about it and whatever. So it's probably making more sense to hit that first.
The other players are going to get sick of answering questions about Duran and his eating habits and weight loss.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Hey guys, how's Duran?
We're pretty soon going to be, reaching uncomfortable territory. So what's he look like with his shirt off, guys? What do you think?
Yes. Okay, ready?
Journalism.
Yeah.
Gotta love it. All right. Okay, here we go. You are listening to the Assembly Call. I am Jared Morris here talking IU hoops with my co-hosts on the Assembly Call IU postgame show, Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips. And guys, let's dive in and talk about this week's media availability. So Archie Miller, as well as a cadre of players, were made available to the media. Media was able to ask a lot of questions. We got a lot of answers, and sometimes from these events you don't get a lot of insight. But I thought we got some really interesting comments from both players and coaches. And so I want to get your top takeaways. And Ryan, we're going to start with you, and we're going to start with the obvious kind of biggest takeaway from this, which is Duran Davis. And we know that it's the biggest takeaway because literally in every twosome of guys that came out, you had Josh Newkirk and Robert Johnson came out together, Curtis Jones and Devontae Green. Colin Hartman, and then Juwan Morgan, Deron Davis came out. But everybody was asked about Deron Davis, even in sessions when he wasn't there. So that clearly is the top offseason storyline. And so I have to imagine that is your top takeaway from what we saw on Tuesday.
Yeah, it was. And I thought it was great that, everybody was praising him. There was and they were all saying the same thing. So you felt like it wasn't token. It was, they actually were, impressed by what was going on with him. He's lost 20 pounds. Everybody was saying he's more nimble. He's playing above the rim. He's running faster. He just looks more comfortable. He came in at 271 as a freshman and is now down at least 20 pounds from, I don't know what he was at the beginning of the summer, but 20 pounds from that. So that's going to make him more mobile, make him able, and it's going to help him defensively, offensively. And the reason everyone's asking about him is because of how important Deron is to this team. I mean, he is your lone pure post guy. You've got other guys who can play down there and who can help out. Juwan Morgan can certainly help out. We've seen Colin Hartman do it before. Freddie McSwain's going to be in the mix. But one thing that you don't have is that stellar go-to post-up guy and rim protector. You don't have a classic guy like that. He's the only one. And so I think that that's why it's so important. That's why everyone's asking. And Archie Miller, to the credit of the journalist, Archie Miller started this. He said it at the beginning of the year, when he got hired at the beginning of the offseason. He said that's the most important thing was, he mentioned it so many times, Deron getting in shape and buying in and getting into a workout program and changing his diet and all that stuff. Archie brought all that up. And so it's going to be a major focus for the team to get him to where he can really contribute and stay on the floor. Remember, last year didn't play a ton of minutes. It might have been because he was out of shape and also foul trouble. Those are the two things. So I thought that was the biggest thing for everybody. And I think everybody knows that. I think all the players know that because they seem to be noticing everything Deron does on the floor.
Well, and it seems like there's even been a domino effect because you had Juwan Morgan even say, shoot, I was eating poorly 3 days out of the week, and now I'm looking over at Deron, and it's changed, what I'm doing. So my question for you, Andy, is has Deron Davis's weight loss inspired you to eat better and exercise more?
It probably ought to. I don't know whether it has or not, but it probably should. It's funny. Ryan mentioned the foul trouble, and even Deron. I thought it was interesting that he mentioned that a lot of his fouls he got because he just felt like he was tired and was, wasn't able to, to use his strength and just was, he kind of attributed some of that, not necessarily to being out of position, not to being young, not to those things, but he really put, part of the blame on those kinds of things into the conditioning and all that. And I think some of that, he was definitely, I believe he's one that alluded to it. Not only the time that he missed over last summer, but the fact that this year's freshmen aren't missing that time for different reasons. And so he talked about that. So yeah, I obviously based on the, sheer volume of questions about it, but also, in kind of hearing him talk, you could tell he's really confident and feels good about what he's been able to accomplish from that perspective. And seems like even though it wasn't mentioned among the leaders, certainly I think has a good understanding of how important he's going to be to the team.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, he's vital. And so all of these stories about him being in better shape, being ready to take on that extra load are huge for Indiana heading into next season. Andy, what else stood out for you? Biggest takeaways from the media availability?
One of the other things was, and maybe it was because, 4 of the guys they talked to were guards, but I think the importance of Archie being a major college point guard and how that's going to shape what those guys do and how they develop and how they play. They talked about, I think it was Newkirk and Rojo talking about how he was, telling them about how to make the right reads, how to, get in the lane, how to make certain passes and things like that. And I think his experience and being able to play at the level that he did will really help them. And so I think that will be there. And that really feeds directly into the turnovers. You heard decision-making mentioned over and over and over again, certainly by the guards and just, being able to make the smart pass. And so I think, again, that all is going to, filter down from him and his experience there. So I think that's certainly going to be important as we, look forward to a season where hopefully the turnover numbers come down and some of those kinds of things. I think a lot of that will be able to be attributed to, his tutelage as a former, ACC point guard and being able to show these guys some of the little nuances that they may not have noticed before.
You're listening to the Assembly Column. Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips discussing this week's media availability. And there were tons of takeaways. And if you haven't had a chance to watch all of the videos or check out the transcripts, our friends over at Inside the Hall have all the videos there, all the transcripts. So it's definitely worth checking them out. I will say the other big takeaway that I had to do with Colin Hartman. And the obvious one is that he's cleared for contact now, which is great to hear. So obviously they're going to work him back in. And he talked about the difference between just kind of getting more comfortable on your own and then having now to account for other people and account for contact and kind of what that transition is going to be. But I also thought it was interesting what other people said. And the other kind of theme that you heard, everybody was talking about Deron Davis, but you heard a lot of commentary about how important Colin is as a leader. Archie Miller talked about it. I thought Juwan really made the point, about what they lost and not having Colin there. He even made a comment that, he and OG used to joke that Colin Hartman was kind of like the guy that, whose voice you didn't want to hear, and they would kind of groan. But it's one of those where that he's right. So you take it and you really miss it when he's not there to kind of give that advice. And, it really made me, think back to last season and you just wonder a little bit how the leadership issues, might they have been improved some? I mean, they certainly would have been improved, but how much would Colin Hartman have helped? And I think having him back, who knows what he'll be able to do statistically, but having him in uniform, being able to provide that leadership, I think is really big. Ryan, what else stood out to you from the media availability?
Well, I just think that the focus on turnovers and aggressiveness and toughness, I think were really important, and the focus on defense too. I mean, we Curtis Jones and Devontae Green and Robert Johnson and Josh Newkirk all focused on that, and toughness, defense, things that we haven't seen much of consistently over the past few years. I think it's music to everybody's ears, and not turning the ball over has been mentioned. I think that is something that is just enormous for this team moving forward, because if you cut out those turnovers, you actually stop the other team from scoring in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I thought it was also interesting, Archie Miller talked some about the schedule, and people have wondered, what will Indiana do with the week between the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament? Do you, hold an exhibition game for there? Do you try and do something? And Archie basically made it clear that he doesn't really believe in that, thinks there's so much risk, to injury and other things. Yeah. If you added a game there, and he basically said, look, the Wichita States of the world have been using that week to just work on your own stuff, get healthy. And so it sounds like that is what Indiana will do. And again, that's an anomaly this year because of the Big Ten tournament being in New York City. It's not like he needs to have a game plan for that happening every season. It won't happen.
You mean the dumbest thing
years.
ever? The dumbest thing ever, the Big Ten championship being in New York City a week early?
Surely the Big Ten has thought of dumber things than that. We can think of many. I'm
really,
sure.
Really name them. Well, legends and leaders. Okay, yeah.
See, there you go. That didn't take long, did it?
It did not take long. No. I stand
why don't you think
by
about
myself
it for a little while?
And we have a great question about the schedule coming up too. So that'll be a fun one. Andy, what about Robert Johnson? I mean, you're the president of the fan club. I thought he obviously spoke, and I think Archie again, kind of publicly challenged Robert a little bit. Kind of reiterated the fact that Robert is doing better, but still needs to come out of his shell, come out of his comfort zone a little bit. And again, everything I've been hearing suggests that he's been doing that more and more. What did you think from some of the comments about Robert?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like it's things we heard about him a little bit in the past. I think Crean had alluded to that, in years prior, that he was very much a, lead by example guy and was going to be a really hard worker and do the right things, but wasn't necessarily vocal. And so, to a certain extent, it's trying to get people to, come out of what their, natural personality comfort zone is. And so he seemed to, he seemed to really, when he and Newkirk were up there, he seemed to kind of, I guess, take charge in that sense in terms of really jumping in, trying to answer a lot of the questions and things like that. So it sounds like he's had a pretty positive offseason. Spoke well of, the feedback he got from the NBA process that, he was going to look to incorporate, whether he could, play point guard at a high level and run a team. I think is something we've wondered. I don't know how much chance he'll get to do that this year as somebody who may end up being, primarily an off the ball guy, and consistency. And I think, that's the one where you look ahead to the season and he's a guy who has to be there night in and night out, as the, fourth or fifth guy, you can kind of ebb and flow a little bit. And certainly we noticed last year when he played well and what that did with the team. But, there can't be a whole lot of off nights for him, this year as a senior and the amount of games he's played. So I thought that was there. And the other thing, which was something interesting I hadn't really thought of in this way, was they talked about the freshmen, really kind of normally coming in behind where everybody else is. But in this case, with, installing a new system, really gave them a chance to be on a, somewhat level playing field. Obviously, they're not used to the speed of the college game and things like that. But I thought that was, kind of an interesting way to think of them getting in and, whether that means they're going to earn, earlier minutes than they might normally have. Obviously remains to be seen, too early to say that, but, kind of an interesting thing to spin forward as you start to project what a rotation might look like, where you may inherently discount some of those guys, but maybe that's not the right way to think of it.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that the last couple of weeks, that I kind of forget about Clifton Moore sometimes. We talk about Indiana's lack of depth, and he's not a replacement for Deron Davis because they're two totally different types of players, even though they're roughly the same height. But if Clifton can come in, really take advantage of the time with Cliff Marshall and work his way into the rotation, that would be huge for Indiana, just to have another guy his size who's able to get out there and play. So that really will be big. And obviously, if Justin Smith can do the same, I think Al Durham might have a little bit of a harder time cracking the rotation early just because of the depth that you have there in the backcourt.
But anything, of praise for Al Durham's shooting ability.
I know. I mean, there's been a lot of praise all around. So, which is hey, look, Indiana's unheralded recruiting classes recently have been the ones that have really been doing well. So, maybe that'll happen again. But
the one other thing you mentioned, Cliff Marshall, he was right up there with, partly it was linked to Duran, but a lot of Cliff Marshall questions, which were like veiled. So Lionel Anderson seemed a little nuts, right? But nobody would really come out and say that. It just felt like, so what's the difference in him?
There's lots of describing Cliff as laid back, Yeah.
It was a lot of, I'm not going to come out and ask what I really want to ask, but that was a fixture in each one, much like Duran's, new physique.
So you're saying Cliff probably won't be heckling Ethan Happ when Wisconsin comes to Bloomington?
Kind of bothers me, actually.
I would wholeheartedly support that. I don't mean to say.
Just leave Ethan Happ heckling Durant.
Or maybe he could just point out that he travels every time he touches the ball, and not in a heckling way, but just more in a constructive criticism to the officials. You guys might want to check this out. He's been doing this for 3 years.
Well, he can join 17,000 other IU fans in doing that. Alrighty, awesome stuff. It's really, I mean, we appreciate IU making those guys available, giving us that insight in the offseason. It's always helpful, and it's great to get that peek into what's going on with the program during the long summer months as we wait for this exciting new season to kick off. All right, well, you guys sent in a bunch of questions via Twitter. We are excited to answer them, and so we will do that in our next segment, including one about what 2 Big Ten games we hope Indiana gets to play early in December. That'll be a fun one. That's coming up next. Beautiful. That was 13:53. We're at 29:09. It's a good spot to be. So we can probably do like 15 minutes on this segment and then figure out what we want to end with. We have some good questions, so we might just roll the questions into
bleed
the
a couple
segment.
into the. Oh, yeah, that's fine.
So, okay, we'll start with Brandon's question. This is a good one.
Yeah.
No need to give away what our answers are. We can surprise each other while live. And then, did you guys get a chance to look at the other questions?
I glanced through them earlier.
Yeah,
I should probably take another look again.
I don't know if we'll get to the last couple, but they're there since they were submitted. Pathetical. Andy, do you have anything on Chris's question?
Larry Bird, why would Larry Bird have any impact on Indiana basketball?
If he hadn't transferred.
That's the...
Yeah.
Well, you would.
We were talking about what ifs last week on Twitter. Great Indiana what ifs. Okay. It all started with the interview we did with Maurice Creek. What if he had a healthy career at IU? Is that among your top 20 Indiana what ifs? Then you start listing all the what ifs, and there's a ton of them. I mean, I guess it's probably like that at every school, but
yeah,
it feels like there's some pretty epic ones for IU.
Yeah, I mean, that question that Chris had, I don't know that I have a great. I mean, I think I would be certainly some that I guess for the initial year would be more just from a personnel standpoint, who you'd be.
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that because I think
who
we
you'd be
need to
worried
see
about,
it
but I don't
go.
think it's, I
Well,
don't think we
maybe
have
that
an
is the
idea.
answer then, which is that we just have to see what Archie Miller's Hoosiers are going to look like before we even. Really
Yeah, we
know
can
that.
definitely talk about it. I think it's a worthwhile question.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, because it's not going to
but-
look exactly like it did at Dayton. You have different
Right.
personnel and you have different resources and everything. It's going to look a little different. So we don't really know what it's going to look like yet. I think that's our answer.
Okay. Cool. All right, you guys ready to hop into this?
Yep.
Okay. Here we go. You're listening to the Assembly Call. Go to assemblycall.com/join to activate your free membership. You will get our weekly 6-Banner Saturday news roundup delivered right to your inbox every weekend so that you can stay up to date with your Hoosiers during the offseason and even once the season begins. The URL is assemblycall.com/join. I am Jared Morris, talking IU basketball with my co-hosts on the Assembly Call, Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips. Remember, you can join us after every IU basketball game over at assemblycall.com and every week right here for Assembly Call Radio. This is the portion of our weekly show when we turn it over to you and we take the questions that you submitted on Twitter and we do our best to answer them. And we will start with Brandon, who posed this question. Who would you want as IU's 2 early December opponents? An easy Rutgers game? Get the Kohl Center out of the way early? Many possibilities. So I think the answer is pretty obvious here. I say we want absolutely the 2 easiest games we can possibly get. So that would be the game at Rutgers, and then whoever you think is going to be the 13th best team in the Big Ten, bring them to Simon Scott Assembly Hall, and let's get those games. Let's get 2 wins for a number of reasons. Most importantly, that stretch of the schedule is brutally tough for the Hoosiers. And so it's not like we need more tough games stacked in there because we have games against Duke and Louisville and Notre Dame all around it. And number 2, this is a team, obviously with a new coach, a lot of guys in new roles, that's still going to be kind of learning about itself and feeling itself out. And so I would rather have our tougher games later in the year because I have a lot of confidence that, under Archie Miller, this team will be better in January and February and March than it is in December when it's still figuring things out. So I'd rather have some easier teams to have an even better chance at getting those wins early. And look, plus, if you can get 2 wins and you're sitting there at 2-0 in the Big Ten for several weeks before Big Ten play gets going again, that just allows everybody to relax. If you're somehow 1-1 or 0-2, now you've got kind of that little pressure there, that when Big Ten play kicks up again, you're already behind the 8 ball. And so I think for all those reasons, give me the 2 easiest games Indiana can possibly have early. Let's build a little early season momentum, and then let's figure out everything else down the line a little bit when this team has had a chance to gel. Andy, okay, give me your counter then. Why would you want to have harder games in the midst of an already brutal December?
I would actually go 1-1. I'd want 1 easy game. Give me Rutgers on the road, or Nebraska, or whoever's going to be down near the bottom.
By the way, we're so sure Rutgers on the road is going to be so great without Ryan Burton here to save our bacon.
That's fair. That's fair. But let's just assume an easy game. I don't know if it's a team, but assume an easy game, and then Brandon's right. I'd get at the Kohl Center out of the way. I'd get at East Lansing out of the way because nobody expects you to win that. So if you lose that early, you can say, okay, let's build on that.
That is lose, but I think that's loser thinking because I know we're not going to be favored, but let's give ourselves a chance.
I would rather have that than have a tough game in the last week of the season. If we're talking about who do we want to play early versus late, I want to get on a momentum run towards the tournament. That's my goal. And so I don't want to have to travel. And I'm not saying I'm not willing to play a good team. I don't want to have to travel to a tough environment if I'm in the middle of a winning streak, because those games, if you perform badly, can set you back. And I think if you get it out of the way early, then you have a little break to sort of recoup and refigure it out, rejigger whatever's going on there and set up your lineup better and have bad tape to watch and figure things out. I think that's good for the team. I don't want to play 2 tough games, but I'd like to get 1 win, and then I'd like to have a tough game. I'd like a measuring stick to see how this team matches up in the Big Ten. And hey, if it's an early season game, you might be able to steal one there. I don't think you're going to have as easy a time stealing it in February or late February.
Okay, that argument I'll buy a little bit. Andy, what do you say? Break the tie here.
All right, so I would say road game at Ohio State. No one there even knows they'll be playing basketball at that point. We're
That's
still
a good
December.
call. That is a
That's
good
very
call.
true.
That's just living in Ohio for as long as I have. This is what I picked up on.
Is that
So
going to
they
be
won't
Chris
even-
Holtman's wake-up call that he's
they won't
he's
even
not
know
in
that it's
Indiana
happening.
anymore?
Yeah, exactly. Plus, they're not really supposed to be that good. So that's one that's like not the worst of the worst. You save your Rutgers, Nebraska for somewhere in the middle of the season when you need a break. And I think the home game, you know, do you take somebody who you think might look like a good win later in the season? This is the bracketology part of me, talking. But do you take somebody who might look good but is in a kind of transitional time? So like a Michigan, let's say. So they're getting used to not having Derek Walton, Zach Irvin, DJ Wilson, but still should be decent when it's all said and done. Do you get them while they're still trying to figure things out? Minnesota has a lot of guys back, but I think they're a team that, even in Nate Mason's, 8th season, you might be able to knock off. Even a Wisconsin where, they lost a ton, there might be a little bit transitional for them trying to figure things out, who you can kind of bank on being pretty good by the end of the season, because those teams are all going to be in a tough stretch as well. And that's going to be, one of those games is going to be at home for IU. So do you get somebody coming off another road trip or playing, their 3rd game in 6 days or something like that, and you can get a good win at home? The environment's going to be good. Students are going to be there. I'd rather save bad home games for, if I could pick the schedule out myself, save bad home games for a time when the students aren't there, when you don't necessarily need it. So like Rutgers happened to be that way last year, as an example. So I'd say, try to find a transitional team you could play at home, but still could, get a win that'll look good on your resume later. And then Ohio State before people know basketball is even a sport in Columbus.
Okay, Andy's is probably the most sensible, and I think I might agree with Andy.
That can't surprise anybody.
I might agree with Andy, although be careful because Ohio State may be out for revenge after we beat them in football to open the season.
Right.
True.
But I will say I would feel differently if it weren't for all the games that surround those 2 big games in the Big Ten. But when you got the Duke game and the Louisville game and the Notre Dame game, those are going to be tough games for this team. And I worry if you have another really, really tough game in there that could get, that it's going to be a tough stretch either way. So, but Andy, I think your idea is the most sensible. And so I think we will take that as the official assembly call position. And
something that's never been said before on the show. Andy Bottoms, the most sensible person here.
What episode was this? Hey, we knew it happened eventually. Law of averages, guys.
Yes. Okay. All right, let's hit this question quickly. This is from Chris. With Archie's system of play, are there any specific teams that you're uneasy about facing? We discussed this a little bit in the break, and I think we all kind of agree that this is kind of an impossible question to answer right now, right, Andy?
I think I've been conditioned to just say Wisconsin as the answer to this question after,
me too.
After the last handful of years. Whether it's actually true or not, I don't know. I think, this year, to me, will be one to figure out how much Archie adjusts his style of play to the personnel that he has and the level of personnel that he's going to, have on his roster and be able to get in the Big Ten. I certainly think you'll see, the basic principles that has done at Dayton will continue to do, but how he tweaks that and if it's more susceptible to certain styles of play, I think we'll get a better handle on that this year. I think my concerns this year are probably more personnel based, just in terms of, playing teams who have a really deep front line, as we've talked about before, which is not really based on his style so much as it is based on, the roster composition of this year's team. So I think it's too early to tell if there's going to be, somebody who kind of has his number at this point. But, I think, come next off season, probably a fair question that we'll hopefully be able to give a little bit better answer to.
You're listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris here with Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips, and we are answering your questions that you submitted via Twitter. Make sure you are following the Assembly Call on Twitter at Assembly Call, and that's where you can send us questions each week for this segment. This question comes to us from Hoosier Smack. How are we feeling about Archie? Still very early, but are we concerned about early recruiting misses? Ryan, I want to get your thoughts on this, but I will just say in terms of the early recruiting misses, not concerned at all. I don't really consider anything a miss per se. I mean, it's, you're not going to get every recruit that you go after, and Archie and his staff are obviously playing catch up with a lot of the guys in this year's class. I mean, they only had a couple of months to kind of get those relationships going. It's not like he was recruiting the same guys at Dayton that he is at Indiana. So I think it's very difficult to judge him too hard on this class or to consider those, kind of quote unquote misses like you might, in the class of 2019 or 2020 if we're in on a guy for 2 or 3 years. So I just want to state that I'm not really worried about the recruiting at all right now. And I'm still feeling great about Archie. Ryan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think that it's tough to judge these guys since they just got there, and kids are committing earlier and earlier in the process these days, and so they really haven't had a whole lot of time to work these guys and try and figure it out. So it's going to take some time. I think we have to give them, be patient. This might not be the greatest class in the world. There's a lot of spots open, but it may not be the greatest class that Indiana's ever had. It may take them a year or two to really develop those deep relationships they need. I think that there's some hope there with some guys already starting to sort of give the program notice. But you're going to hopefully land one or two really good guys this year and fill out the roster well with other talented players. But I think that the goal is to be good in that long term and not worry so much about it in year one. I mean, you want to have a great recruiting class every year, but you got to remember these guys were behind the 8 ball starting very late, and they weren't recruiting, as you said, they weren't recruiting these same guys at Dayton. And more importantly than just making a big splash, it's getting guys who fit. That this is such a foundational class for Archie, because it's going to be, 4, 5, 6 guys potentially. It's got to be guys who really fit, who are going to have the character on and off the court that you want to build the culture of your program. That's what's so important with this class. And then as you're able to build longer relationships, then hopefully you can jump up and get those 5-star guys. So I just think we need to take a measured approach with how we react to some of this recruiting news. And that leads us to our next question from Tyler, who says, who do you see in the 2018 class as being Coach Miller and Indiana's most important potential recruit? I will say for this one, look, if you can get Romeo Langford or Darius Garland, 2 5-star guys, obviously they become the most important recruit. I mean, those would be huge gets. But at least right now, it doesn't look like Indiana is the favorite there. And so if you start looking at some of the other guys that are more realistic, if you don't get Garland, I think a guy like Robert Finney becomes the most important recruit, because you need a point guard. You need that guy that is going to, be the leader for this team, and that even if he can't step in and start right away, that can be a 3-year starter. And in addition, teams like Purdue are recruiting Robert Finney. So if you can get him and get him away from a rival, and he's an in-state guy that, Archie can kind of pin those inside-out hopes and plans on, I think he becomes a really, really important player if you don't get a guy like Garland. I know you guys don't follow recruiting as much. Any thoughts on, as you look ahead to that class of 2018?
Obviously Langford is I think that is the kind of obvious answer. And certainly if you can find a way to get him, that would, be akin to, Zeller coming to IU during Crean's time. I think outside of that, though, I think it's, you mentioned Finney, Race Thompson has come up a lot. When you look at this class, I mean, with what Archie wants to build, the one thing he doesn't have, and this kind of goes back to the point I made about the freshmen, nobody's able to teach somebody else what they need to do with the program. And so when we, during another offseason show, talked about like who you want IU to emulate, we brought up teams like Michigan State's and Kansas's, where, you get a splash of some one and done type talent. But you also have this tradition and this culture that you have guys who are there for 3 or 4 years that can pass along. And I think Finney, for sure, as you mentioned, I think Race Thompson, a 4-star guy, I believe, maybe he isn't there 4 years, but he isn't a one and done type guy. So are those the kinds of guys, a good portion of this class needs to be the kinds of guys who obviously are, you're not taking untalented guys for the sake of letting them build your program, but you're trying to kind of get some hits in that, some doubles, if you will, in that sweet spot where you really get some guys who are going to be able to be good, cultural fits and guys who can really pass along things that you want to do. And I think those guys seem to fit that a little bit, and why their names, feel like they continue to come up toward the top of a lot of the hot boards and whatever you want to say, whatever you want to call it.
Ryan, if you have thoughts on this, let's get them in the next segment. Coming up in our final segment, we got a couple other questions. We will get to as many of those as we can as we close out another episode of the Assembly Call. Great to be here with you. Stick around for one more segment. All right, 1346 on that one. Oh, nice. Okay, so that put us at 42:55.
What do we got?
We have 7 minutes and 5 seconds. So we have 6 minutes and 29 seconds.
Yeah, I don't need to hit recruits. You guys were pretty thorough on that.
Okay, so what other ones of these questions do we want to hit?
I think we should hit one final one and have it be a good discussion.
Okay, so do you want to talk about?
Ooh, I got it. Let's do instead of the hypothetical Larry Bird thing, say what do you think are the biggest what ifs that you can remember in Indiana basketball, or that you think
Just start listing them out.
Well, you just give your biggest. I know what my biggest is.
Well, I mean, okay. All right, let's do it this segment then. That's cool. I'm good with that. So we got 6:29. So at 6:29, we'll start the outro.
Okay, because my biggest what if is DJ White getting injured in Mike Davis's last year. If he plays that year, is Mike Davis still around at the end of the year? Because DJ missed the entire season.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many of them. I mean, there's some,
I know. We'll just say like
obvious ones, but yeah. Okay. All righty.
And it doesn't have to be like one that you experienced, but it can be whatever one you is most prominent for you.
I know what mine and Andy's number one what if is. We don't even need to go there. Neither one of us will be able to sleep tonight after talking about it.
You're muted, Andy, so I don't know if you're saying anything. But...
He's crying. He's crying, Ryan. Tears.
True.
Big tears.
Yeah. I had no idea I was muted. I was talking and interjecting in that conversation.
I didn't hear a word you said. It's actually kind of nice.
I don't know if it's telling that I just assume you're not listening to me and I just talked anyway, or I'm not sure.
I was going to say, you've been jumping in with more force this episode.
I'm not sure
you've cut me off a couple times.
Better or worse. No, well,
no, it's good.
Oh, now you're keeping score over there. I see how it is.
No, but it's just, it's good. I like it. That's what we need. We need more just jumping in. Fewer long monologues and more interaction. Makes
Tell
the show
him when he's being dumb.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
All right.
Here we go. Okay.
Oh, I did. Sorry. I know you're getting ready to start that. I did say before, one of the things I said was you can use the Larry Bird question as kind of the intro to like why we're talking about the what ifs. Because since it is one, not that any of us may have like strong thoughts on that question, but you can kind of use
that. Is one of the biggest hypotheticals, yeah.
At least give some, credit to the person who submitted it and whatever else.
Yeah. Okay. All
right.
Sweet. You are listening to the Assembly Call. I'm Jared Morris, wrapping up another episode here, talking IU basketball with my co-hosts on the Assembly Call IU postgame show, Andy Bottoms and Ryan Phillips. And guys, let's get to one more question because I think this is going to be the jumping off point for a fun little discussion here. This comes from Twitter user America Lover. He says, hypothetical, what impact would Larry Bird have had on Indiana basketball? And this kind of came, we've been having a conversation on Twitter for the past week or so about, what ifs in Indiana history. And obviously, Larry Bird was on campus for a few weeks, decided to leave. One of the bigger what ifs in Indiana history, I would say. But the options are unmatched, significant, average, little, or none. I think it's pretty clear that it would have been either unmatched or significant, considering what his college career was like. So that certainly would have been fun for everyone to see. But I think what's more interesting than that, because obviously none of us were around then. But what are some of the biggest what ifs in Indiana history? I mean, I think there's obvious ones that jump out, right? Like, what if Scott May hadn't broken his arm in 1975? And there's kind of some fun ones from back in the old days. Like, what if John Wooden had joined his friend Branch McCracken at Indiana instead of going up to Purdue? What if Wilt Chamberlain had come to Indiana? Because that was a thing that could have possibly happened. So there's some of those fun what ifs. But, from your guys' perspective as IU fans, what are some of the biggest what ifs that stick out to you? And by the way, one of the reasons we started having this discussion on Twitter was after the interview that Alex Bozich and I did on Podcast on the Brink with Maurice Creek, because I wondered, what if Maurice Creek had had a healthy IU career? Everybody think back to what he did in that Kentucky game, the promise he showed early. How big of a what if is that? For the Tom Crean era and for Indiana basketball. Just imagine a healthy Maurice Creek on that 2013 team. Pretty that'll kind of jog your mind a little bit and get you going. But what do you guys think? What are some of the biggest what ifs? Ryan, I know one in particular sticks out to you, and Andy, I know you're crying over there, so I'm going to give you some time to compose yourself before you give us yours.
Appreciate it.
Well, the 2005-2006 team that I covered at the IDS had a pretty big what if, and that was Mike Davis's final year at Indiana. And they were expecting to have an all-star front court with Marco Killingsworth and DJ White, and DJ White had foot problems all year and missed the entire season. He was the reigning Big Ten newcomer of the year, freshman of the year, basically, and came in and looked even better in preseason games. Couple preseason games, he was hitting 3-pointers. They were doing a lot of high-low stuff with he and Killingsworth. They were dominating. It looked like just a terrible tandem down low to deal with. And then DJ missed the entire season, and we all know what happened. Mike Davis lost his job. The team just kind of sputtered, showed some promise at times, like in that Duke game we always talk about, and then, won a tough game against San Diego State in the NCAA tournament, but then just sort of fell apart. And man, what could have been with that team having those two guys teamed up down low? Marco wouldn't have had to play 30 minutes a game and may have actually, been able to contribute late in games, getting some more rest with another big guy there. But that really hurt that team. And they had to do something with I remember specifically they had to move Ben Allen into the post, and he was more of an outside shooter, sort of stretch four kind of guy, and they had to move him to post up, and totally ruined his game, and led to his transfer. I mean, it was a mess, and that one injury really threw that whole season off. And that was the team that had Final Four aspirations, and the Final Four that year happened to be in Indianapolis. DJ's injury really ruined that, and we saw what kind of player he was when he came back, and was the Big Ten Player of the Year eventually. So, that's mine. It was really interesting to be on campus during that time.
I swear every episode we mention a player that I never think we're going to be talking about. I did not expect to be talking Ben Allen on this episode.
There you go, Ben Allen.
Here we are. Okay, Andy, will you join me in a moment of silence for Alan Henderson's knee in 1993?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. All right.
Okay.
That was that was my pick. I mean, that team was phenomenal. They're at the time he got hurt, 23-2, 12-0 in the league at that point. And even though he tried to come back, it was fairly obvious he just, was trying to gut through it, but was not the same. I mean, that was probably the most fun team. We talked about this a little bit with some of the, Mount Rushmore players last week where, where teams fall in your kind of formative years matters. But there's no IU teams that I've ever watched, before then or after then that I loved watching as much as those teams in that era, and that one in particular. And it's even interesting to kind of look through. That team played fairly well in the tournament. I think Calbert Chaney. I forget who it was. Was it Dwayne Morton? Was that the guy in Louisville that he just eviscerated in the in the tournament game? So that was, that team still, made it to the regional final against Kansas, but that was, that was crushing. And then, kind of that, particularly on the heels of the other what if a competent official not named Ted Valentine officiated the Final Four game against Duke would be perhaps another one right in that same era.
What if Ivan Renko was real? Might the ensuing seasons have been even better for Indiana?
Wow, that's mind blown on that one.
And, I will say some of the other fun what ifs in Indiana basketball history are kind of going back and seeing, legendary players that just missed playing together by a year. Like if you think about, what if Jay Edwards hadn't gone pro after his second season, a decision that he has said since was a mistake. Well, he would have ended up playing for at least a year, maybe two, with Calbert Chaney and with Greg Graham and with those guys. I mean, imagine a team with Jay Edwards and Calbert Chaney on it. Like, how are you defending that team? I mean, and so some of those are really, some of the most fun ones to think about. But that's the thing, with Indiana basketball, and I'm sure it's like this for a lot of the blue blood programs that have, such a great history and tradition. Is there's so many what ifs out there, and you can easily get lost thinking about banners number 6, 7, 8, 9. If some of those seasons had gone differently. So it is always a fun discussion to think about. But that will wrap it up. That'll do it for us on this week's episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live and be part of the live chat, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live simulcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. Or you can always subscribe to our podcast by searching for Assembly Call wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com/join to activate your free Assembly Call membership. Thank you for listening. We will be back to talk IU hoops again with you next week. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim. And go Hoosiers. And that's a wrap.
Good stuff.
job, gents.
All right, now I get to go to work.
Very nice. Good chat happening tonight too. Thanks to Brian and I mean, we could do a whole show on the what ifs. I mean, trying to squeeze that into 7 minutes, especially when 2 of them were spent talking Ben Allen. That's probably not the most efficient use of time for that discussion.
Oh shit, Yogi's down.
Yeah, I think a guy might have came down and stepped on his personal area.
His little Yogi.
Dude, remember when he like dove out of bounds? It was his senior year. He just like dove.
No, he got a knee.
This guy comes up and then he.
Oh, Justin Jackson.
Oh no.
Oh, I mean that was his heel right into the.
This doesn't sound like a highlight that I want to see.
No, it was pure heel to junk.
Oh man,
oof, that's not fun. All right, I gotta get out of here and get to work.
Okay.
All right.
Later, guys.
See you guys.
All right. We'll see you.
Later.
Hold on, let me change my Skype.
Oh, I guess I should stop the live broadcast.
Well,
see you, everybody.
I don't know
We'll see you
why-
next week.